education should be easy to access by everyone, in no matter what world hemisphere you are, in no matter what conditions your country is facing, ladies and gentlemen. Especially in oppressive country, when there is a systematic oppressions that happen by the government, we say that this government cannot provide a good education for their society. Therefore, we need an external actors to help them handle the whole situations and provide them educations. Therefore, our end goal in this debate is that we want to provide a good education for these people, and we don't really want to emphasize on the how we can free them from an oppressive state, ladies and gentlemen. We say that we will more run in the principle of how we provide them educations and how it will be better. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, before I jump to my argument, let me give several mechanisms in this debate. First of all, these debates run in the perspective of international community in seeing these problems. We see, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't really want to discuss on whether or not there will be a backlash coming from this government to ignore these educations and restrict them to be established in the country, because we're still going to ask for permissions and consent, and we will not really run in the countries that are too extreme, for example, North Korea and etc. We will run in the country where they need educations, but they are hard to provide that. But because there is an oppression, ladies and gentlemen. For example, countries like Vietnam and etc. Ladies and gentlemen, we say that we don't want to really run on a too extreme country. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we say that my argument will be divided in 2 points. First, why it's principally good for the states and the institution itself. Why? Second, why in the long term it will create a better situations for these people at the end of the day. First argument, why it's principally good for the states and the institutions. Let's talk about the institution first, right? We say, ladies and gentlemen, that these institutions, the characterizations of this Western education institution is that they are really, really progressive, right? They have more good curriculum, they have more curriculum in good educations, and they also have capital or image to maintain, ladies and gentlemen. They have capital, huge amount of capital, and a good lecturer to provide education, ladies and gentlemen, and also really a lot of books, for example, to access by these people, ladies and gentlemen. This Western education is really good, right? But the problem in current status quo that in order to accept in Harvard or Oxford and etc., it requires you a lot, right? It requires you to go through so many competitions, and most likely these competitions will be won by a first world country in which the students is already really smart and affluent people, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we see that this is really, really a problem, right? Because these institutions are hardly centralized on the first world students, for example, that already smart in the very first place with high GPA and etc. This is the portrayal that this institution doesn't want to get a big burden and cannot provide a good, perform a good education and inclusive education for everyone, ladies and gentlemen, because they are highly contingent upon these people that are already smart in the very first place. It is time for them to spread their wings and give more provide educations for these people in the third world country, ladies and gentlemen. We say because they are the one at the first place, they are the one who have a big incentive to do so, because they have bigger capital, they have bigger, better educations that can provide these people a good educations at the very first place. Also, ladies and gentlemen, we say that there is already a huge incentive coming from, for example, first world society like American society to give these people an education. There is already like critique like how this third world country is so conservative and etc. But there is no significant actions on it, ladies and gentlemen, because the institutions is only centralized to these affluent people at the very first place. We say that we need to spread this first world, third world countries people. Also, ladies and gentlemen, even if this third world society want to accept in Oxford, for example, it's really hard for them, right? Because the competition is really, really hard. They need to fight with so many people that are so many that already smart at the very first place. And even if they surpass, we say that there will be two probability. First, they will be hard to mobilize. It's really hard to get an access to this first world country. And second, they will be, even if they are accepted, there will be a high tendency that these people will stay in the country in the United States, for example, without going back to their origin country, because simply they find it more comfortable in there. And we say that it is really harmful because you have to contribute back to your country, ladies and gentlemen, because they are the one that you should be protected at the first place. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we say that this is really, really good for the institution itself, ladies and gentlemen, because they will gain more image to, for example, to be more inclusive and have more image, ladies and gentlemen. And also they will be seen as an institutions that try to spread their wings in helping other people in the third world country to perform better education at the very first place. Also, ladies and gentlemen, we said it's really, really beneficial and really, really principally good for these oppressive states, right? Because the characterizations of these oppressive states is that first, they are very, very authoritarian. They have a low educations in terms of bad curriculum. They are very, very the curriculum is very, very limited. They have, for example, it only operates in certain fields and not really give so many options for these people to access at the very first place. Also, they are very, very lack in access to books and etc. and literature to begin with. Also, the characterizations of this oppressive states community is that they are very, very conservative and they are very, very submissive to the state's actions, right? We say that it's really problematic, right? Because we need to give them an incentive to be more liberal, for example, in order to create more check and balances inside the country. We say that these institutions, at the end of the day, will be more we say that these institutions will break those kind of stigma that in the first place, because we say that the oppressive states is really less open to the current world problem, and really for other problem like highly patriarchy and woman representations in politics is still very, very low. We say that these institutions will help them to be a more to provide them better with better curriculum. And this particular curriculum, we're not going to say that this curriculum will be too, for example, backlashing the ideology of this country, because we're still going to adjust the curriculum, right? We're still going to make a good curriculum in which it provides the basic needs of these people, for example, in terms of agriculture and how they survive at the very first place. Therefore, we don't really go to the extent where we try to change this person's ideology at the very first place. My second argument, why in the long term it will create better situations. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we say that even if it's not really solving the oppressions inside the states, it will be better because it will lead to better political discourse. For example, scrutinization from society will exist because there will be more counterbalances coming up from the society to their government to scrutinize them whenever they try to be bad at the very first place. And also they can contribute at the very least. If they cannot do that, they still contribute, for example, to build school, for example. They can contribute in their own way, for example, how and help them in their basic living, for example, how to cultivate your land and etc. It will teach, for example, their children to be a good children and etc. Ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we say that we are proud to propose these motions.
Ladies and gentlemen, we think that the Western education institution is not going to be suitable for the oppressive state. Understand that the change won't happen in the side of the house because it's not in line with the characteristic of the oppressive state at the very first beginning, and how support these kinds of education institution would create more oppressive circumstances for the people inside the state that I will explain more in my argument. So our stance as the opposition, we say that we don't want to support these kinds of Western education in oppressive state, but we still establish the universities that inherently suitable with the ideology of their own state, ladies and gentlemen. We are using the approach step by step, not that also coming by the organic change to the state itself, ladies and gentlemen. We establish universities that have the same goals with the goals of the state at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That is why we don't want to use these kinds of pragmatic change in the same in the side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. So 3 arguments in my speech. First is that why support Western education is also a form of oppression. Secondly, why having the Western education in institution is not suitable with the oppressive state. And third argument, how in our side universities can be still progressive inside their own nations, ladies and gentlemen. So rebuttals to the opposition side of the house. We say that in opposition, we still, they say that they support these kinds of education because this is something that is really progressive. Ladies and gentlemen, even in our side, we still support the form of education is something that important to fulfill by the nations, ladies and gentlemen. This debate must prove whether or not it's in line to apply, is it suitable to apply the Western education in the current status quo with what kind of the condition that oppressive state already face in the current status quo, ladies and gentlemen. Example like the strong regime in China, for example, that is really, really hard to these kinds of Western educations have to engage with, but also opposition must prove in their side why in their side the oppressive state would accept these kinds of Western education at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So their main argument is talk about Western have capital and have a good curriculum. That is why we have to apply these kinds of thing and in the oppressive state. We say that this is problematic because they never explain to us then what is the problem in oppressive state in terms of their education, ladies and gentlemen. Because even the status quo, Xi Jinping always tried to support the education in their own state, ladies and gentlemen. That is why we say that there is no such a big problem in their side of the house. But also, the problem in opposition, if your problem is about capital and have a good curriculum, even the oppression state also have their own system to establish their own education, ladies and gentlemen. If your problem, people hard to access education like Harvard, Oxford, and etc., then they need to apply to whole nation like Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. They never explain to us why it's exclusive towards the nation like oppressive state, ladies and gentlemen. Even if they say that the oppressive state would adjust with the curriculum, for example, then they need to explain about how the characterization of these kinds of Western values like such as free speech, for example, idea of democracy, for example, would be applied under the side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. So that is all my response, and other response would be integrated with my argument. So first argument, why support Western education is a form of oppressions. Ladies and gentlemen, understand in the past that form of oppression in the past is comes by other forms like creating war, for example, improving the chaos inside of the society, support the human slave, for example, and etc., etc. In the status quo, the change of oppression exists in other approach and in many kinds of approach, ladies and gentlemen. Example like giving loan to African people that actually unable to pay it back. That is a form of oppression, right? But secondly, let's talk about a form of education, right? Using education approach such as support the Western education institution to apply in any nation, especially to the Western oppressive state. We say that this is also a form of oppression, ladies and gentlemen. Why we say that so? Because it's harmful, because you force the state to apply something that is not in line with their own state itself, ladies and gentlemen. But also the state condition that unable to adapt with any circumstances that is not suitable and is not habituated by their own nations, ladies and gentlemen. That is why we say that under their side it's going to create more oppression to the state. But second argument, why having the Western education institution is not suitable with the oppressive state. That is also support my first argument. Understand that the characterization of oppressive states, ladies and gentlemen. Oppressive state is a state that have their own habituation with the characteristic of their state, have a strong regime. The people behind the regime that also most give powerful impact inside their own state, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be hard in the government side of the house, because why? First, people inside the state would not be habituated with the construction that state is already so strong, ladies and gentlemen. So they would unable to adapt with the new form of education. And also, instead of the construction that it's really strong, the leader also have so strong impact to their own nations, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, the oppressive state that oppose, there are so many oppressive states that also oppose the idea of Westernizations, ladies and gentlemen. Example like Iraq, Arab, North Korea, and so on and so forth. They are actually opposition of USA, for example, ladies and gentlemen. So they don't want to support these kinds of idea, because these kinds of education would deliver the value of the Western idea at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. This argument shows to you how unfamiliar the people inside of the oppressive state with the value of the Western society, ladies and gentlemen, especially when it comes to the educational form. There is also a response the case that coming by Iksan, that how people also is really conservative inside of the oppressive state. So that is why we say that the change won't happen in our side, in their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. But also characteristic of Western educations. Understand the form of education in Western education institution, most likely they would bring their own major concern, ladies and gentlemen. What is that? First is that educate people how to be more open-minded, teach open market system inside of the state, an idea of democratization inside of the nation. It's harmful because for oppressive state like China, for example, that still support the holy of their own state, ladies and gentlemen. Especially we don't see that education is not that really problematic inside the state, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, education is a form of how you continue your own life, ladies and gentlemen. Understand that the characteristic of Western education, they teach people about the idea of competitions, ladies and gentlemen, and how to support the individual trade. That is really important to be delivered for all the people. It's harmful for states like China, Venezuela, and so on and so forth, because it oppose the idea of communal citizens, ladies and gentlemen, which it's harmful for the local people because it would change their mindset and doctrinize the bad value to those kinds of oppressive state that already established at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Third argument, how in our side the university can still be progressive. I already explained to you how people want suitable and habituate with their educations, but even if, let's talk about even if the change would happen in their side of the house, we do not like it, ladies and gentlemen, because at the end, the people that only engage in Western educations that have the privilege to begin with, they had the idea of liberalization, for example, ladies and gentlemen. We say that it's harmful because it's only for exclusive people and some of people, ladies and gentlemen. There are people that have a pragmatic traits to dismiss the idea of organic change in their own state, ladies and gentlemen. We also do not want to support these kinds of people engage in the Western education, ladies and gentlemen. It's harmful because it would only conduct by the few of people the change, so the change won't happen in their side of the house. Because in order to create change, you need communal support. That we say that it's only exclusive in our side, ladies and gentlemen, because the education would be suitable with the ideology of their own state. Even if there will be systematic change, it's harmful because it can create chaos, and the state most likely interfere to this kinds of thing, and the war most likely happen inside their own state, ladies and gentlemen. We proud to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, understand, if the society are educated, they will not do certain things that could harm them that badly, as the opposite side of all already told you guys before. The right that the society will lead when they are educated will be a way of the diplomacy, for example, not by riot, because they understand that riot could hurt them in the end of the day. Okay, moving on to my rebuttal. First rebuttal, the opposite side of the house says that they will keep the institution that exists in the current status quo because those particular institution is in line with the ideology of those certain oppressive state. We say that we say no, because the education that provided by the oppressive state have the tendency to teach the society to obey those particular leader of their society, of those particular state. We say that those teaching that told to them in their campus, for example, teachings that told them example about nationalism and so on and so forth. Hence why you shouldn't fight to your leader even if they did wrong things, so on and so forth. We say that this is bad for us because it will lead the society to couldn't be progressive. We say that the progressiveness is those particular things that we need in the current status quo to fight those particular oppressiveness, to fight those certain things that could harm us in the future, ladies and gentlemen. We say that when they are educated, we will have those particular epistemic community, and then they will fight those oppressiveness by the diplomatic way, as I already told you guys before. And also, the second rebuttal, the opposite side of the house say that this oppressive state will not accept these this Western education institution. We say no, this oppressive state will exit this Western education institution, because why? First, understand that the tendency of these oppressive states only focus on their military, for example. They are only focused to improve their military, and then they didn't even care about their education. Hence why, the moment when we provide certain things, we as the Western education institution provide education to them, they will accept that because they need that. They need those education because they couldn't provide those particular things to their society, ladies and gentlemen. Second reason, understand that these Western education institutions will have a better power. They have capital, ladies and gentlemen. They have capital that could help them to get into those particular oppressive state, ladies and gentlemen. Hence why the argumentation that coming from Neny saying that this Western education institution couldn't get into those certain oppressive state couldn't count it in this debate. Third rebuttal, they say that it is clear that we won't set up setting up campuses in those oppressive states that truly opposite with us. For example, when we are as a Western education institution, we won't set up our campuses in those certain country that already opposite with us. For example, like China. Okay, moving on to my point. One thing that I will prove in this debate, what will be the impact of it? First, Western education institution will seen as a good institution. They could maintain their image. Why? Because the oppressive state have tendency to seen as those states that we should take care, as those states that we should concern about. When Western education institutions set up their campus in those oppressive states, they will seen as a hero, as the helper, because they're giving those particular education to those who need. We say that Western education institution needs this public discussion, so they will have better reputation, ladies and gentlemen. Second reason, the education in those countries could be improved. Why? Because we also notice that there is potential person that exists in those oppressive states, but they have no platform to improve. Even if there is some student that able to get into Harvard or Yale, it will be less number because they have lesser possibility. Why? Because the curriculum in their state or the facilities in their state are oppressive. They didn't have a proper curriculum to get in to Harvard, for example. Even if they are success to get in, it will be hard for them to survive. Why? Because first they have a different culture. Secondly, about the tuition fee, we say that the tendency of those students that coming from oppressive state, they will not have a proper tuition fee that they need to get into those certain campus, ladies and gentlemen. And even if they are able to survive, they will not go back to their own country because they will not go back to their own country to help those certain country. Why? Because they already comfortable and they will save in those those Western country, ladies and gentlemen. And this is bad because we say that their oppressive state needs them to change, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, oppositions might say that this education from Western education institution could lead into different ideology and the point of view between the government and the society, because we'll take the bold stance that it is okay if that is happen, because this could lead into the discussion between the society and the government, and the society will understand that it is okay for them not to follow their government if the government do bad things to them. And this is exclusive because in the current status quo, the reason why the society didn't do, for example, riot to their government, because they don't have proper education. They feel inferior by their government. With giving them better understanding, it will lead them to better fight, ladies and gentlemen. And also, the first world country have tendency to the global society have a tendency to see those first world country that they only criticize third world country without doing any action. We say that this is not true, because this first world country won't have a tendency to wanted to help this third world country, but they didn't have those such way. But we support this kind of particular motion, those first world country could help this third world country. That's all. Hence why we are proud to propose.
Panel's clarification. We basically want two things. First, we want an organic change. Second, within the process of the organic change, we want to protect the most vulnerable actor and not making a reckless decision to involve a Western liberal ideology, thus to make the situation worse. That is why the debate also should focus on which proposal would harm the citizen more if they are exposed with Western value. In comparatively, in our side, we are minimizing the harm caused by the people who is vocal, stating their ideology, and not being targeted by the supreme leader, for example, in North Korea. Thus, here's my engagement. First engagement, the mechanism that they want to be being diplomatic, not going to be a riot, seems to be very unrealistic. Why? Because both system of education in their side of the house and our side of the house would eventually result to riot when they became to the conclusions that they should change the system of a regime or a state, or when it comes to want to change the system into revolution. What happened in Nicaragua in 1932 is they want to have a revolution based on liberal value, because they came to realize that the liberal value or democracy is the base system to be implemented too. Thus, the riot will eventually happen. But in our side, why it is better, because we don't ignite the very, very violent leader to target the most vocal person inside of the particular streets and just hunt them down. That is why it is better in our side. The rest of it will be engaged in my several substantive. There's two things that I want to bring in this debate. First debate, I want to extend Neny's case about the likelihood of organic change. But second of all, I will engage to our versus scenario why even the situation of creating better situation in their side, creating better political discourse in their side is not going to be happen, and also worsen the condition of a state. First of all, it is the likelihood of organic change. What do we mean by the ideal organic change? Is that the revolution that is done step by step. They come to the negotiation, maybe they come to fight, for example, they are defining the types of new regime once they are going to be fight and do a revolution. That's the ideal organic change in our side of the house. But in status quo, we want to also prove to you that there is already organic change that exists. For example, like in Chinese parties, in Chinese community, there are also an opposition parties that is actively fighting the CCP, for example. But in a very extreme case, when they should do riot, they are also having a guerrilla squad, for example, like in Middle East. What I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say that in our status quo, the efforts of us doing an organic change still exists. The different within their side of the house, we are still using our ideologies and our ideals about what is the ideal of a new state if we want to implement a new state not based on the liberal value. But what is exclusive harm of injecting the Western liberal ideology towards the university? Let's take an example of Arab Spring. The reason why that is happening, it is because their realization of the democratic idea that is better, and they are being impulsive and trying to implement it by causing riot without necessarily rationalizing the power of the regime, and directly it resulted to fail because they are also cannot defining the new types of the regime that they want to be into. But even if in our side of the house there is no organic change and systematic revolution, why the government actually in status quo open the chance to not that oppressive, ladies and gentlemen? Because even in an oppressive state where the government most likely still gives you basic needs, for example, they still gives you an education, they are still dictating how you are trying to obtain those particular skill set to make sure that you are survive in workplace, for example, because they want their country still run. They need labor for make sure that their industry is still working. They also need the cycle of economy still working. That is why they are giving that particular skill set into farmers, for example. That is why they are also needed to having an enhancement of their infrastructure, for example, etc. That is why even in a condition of an oppressive state, it is not going to be that oppressive, because there is an initial intention also from the government to create this country better. because of those particular motives that exist. Implementing the Universal House policy in make sure that the change will be done systematically per se, it will not creating those particular ideal conditions in an ideal situation, which is very, very toxic within their particular discriminative leader, ladies and gentlemen. But let's engage in my second argument. In their worst scenario, if their Western education would create a better situation, create a better political discourse, for example, we say it is not going to be happen. Neny already told to you that it is not suitable because most of the oppressive state reject the idea of Westernization. For example, like how Iran reject the narrative of reject the ideology of US, of Western ideology, because they think it is evil and it is okay for them to just cut their heads off, for example. Or for example, even in Chinese society, they also believe that Westernization is the most biggest enemy that they want to fight. That is why their concept called Easternization, ladies and gentlemen. But the second thing that Neny is trying to prove to us, that the education inside the particular state is also to be inclusive and going to be inclusive. It's going to be better at increasing increasing. For example, why is that so? Because they are come to the realization that even in an oppressive state, they should make sure that first their particular society is still obeying their leader. Thus, their particular skill set and learning should be taught since their very first beginning of the learning process towards the children, because it is very important step for them to make sure that the process of internalization of the ideology of the communists, for example, the ideology of Khilafah and etc., it is still ingrained and internalized towards the society, for example. What is harm if we are implementing those particular proposals? There will be a gaslight or maybe an image branding that is toxic towards the government. Tory said institution would be seen as a hero, but that is not realistic. Because the leader will claim that they are the savior of the nation and the Western society is the evil. They will pinpoint those particular university and say this university is harmful towards the state. There is the evil actor that is possibly want to destroy the state. Why this is possible for the society to trust? Because they have the control of media flow and flow of information, ladies and gentlemen. The society will trust them because there is no other source of information for them to believe. Thus, the likelihood of why they want to be seen as a hero is not going to be possible also. But here's our worst scenario. If there's an individual or group that is able to ignite the discussion about liberal ideology, for example, thus the government most likely would shut them down. Why? Because their government would say that is a focal, that is also a threat for a nation. They would say to the government that they will shut them down because it is a threat, and the discussion would be separated because it will give an additional job for the government to be solved in two. Thus, as an oppressive state, the government most likely neglect the value of human rights. They are most likely neglect the value of how to be ideally doing a discussion. Thus, shooting them down is the most shortest thing to do. But comparatively in our side, at least with the unideal condition that is happening, people will still can survive because they are the most vulnerable actor. Then the most vulnerable actor in an oppressive state should just obey what the leader can say, for example. Second, we are also can and have the ability to adapting with the unpredicted action by oppressive regime. If you are claim that you are having a liberal value, most likely there is an unpredicted action that this oppressive regime will do, because that is their characteristic, being irrational. But the third of all, the change in our side comparatively still exists. It is safer. It is safer because even if they are die, for example, they do it communally. They are doing it in the same understanding that the government is already collapsed and they want to build a new regime which is defined by their their custom, and it is better because it is the understanding of them. And we propose. Thank you.
Three things I want to talk in this debate. First, is it justified for Western education institution to set up campus in oppressive state? Second, which sides will going to create organic change and systematic change? Thirdly, is the oppressive governance will give approval to set up campuses in oppressive states? Going to the first class, right? Is it justified? For Western education institution to set up campus in oppressive state? opposition to the House says that also a form of oppression. It creates a hierarchy. Panels, the characterization of oppression is being dismissive to the characteristics of Western education institution, in which they're not that malicious anyway, ladies and gentlemen. They're not going to be oppressive because by setting up campuses to begin with is already a sign that they want to be inclusive anyway, ladies and gentlemen. Since they are Western, meaning that they will have the tendency to be progressive, to be democratic, because they uphold Western democratic value that upholds inclusivity, equal opportunities, equal rights, and so on and so forth. So Neny's characterization about they will be oppressive is self-defeating because they are being dismissive. They're being dismissive towards this characterization. But even if it's oppressive, it's still okay because at the very least we give them the basic necessity tools of education. Secondly, they say that it's not justified because they uphold different values of ideology. Yes, this is true. Yes, they have different ideology, but it doesn't mean education is different inherently to begin with. It doesn't mean math, physics, biology is different in every country to begin with. Just because the ideology is different doesn't mean that we cannot still have utilitarian education. Doesn't mean that utilitarian education is inherently different. Doesn't mean that formulas, doesn't mean subject books is different in every country. So their main concern about ideology is not that really main concerning because to the very least, even if we have different ideologies, we still have platforms to educate people in utilitarian possible to free them from the systematic oppression. Thirdly, they say that it's not that justified because Western value is too controversial, too extreme. Panels, what Western democratic has taught us that people have equal rights, people have equal opportunities. So people should be progressive. People should be progressive. So their characterization about Western value is too extreme to be upheld in oppressive state does not really problematic because it shows people that people can be progressive. People can be progressive at the end of the day. So even if it's Western ideology will be implemented in that oppressive state, it's still okay because it shows people that they still have chance, they still have equal opportunity, they still have equal opportunities. All of the justifications why it's not justified they mainly concern about ideology, but they never explain why the status quo utilitarian education in that oppressive state is enough, ladies and gentlemen. They never explain why the curriculum of mathematics, why curriculum of biology, physics in that certain state is enough to free them from the oppression, is enough to free them to be progressive at the end of the day. In comparison to our side, why is it justified to set up campus in oppressive state? Because one, what oppressive state needs, they need proliferation of education in which they are lacking of progressive curriculum, they are lacking of utilitarian education. They need human resource in order to free them from the oppression. They need a better platform to explore their knowledge. All of their characterization saying that status quo enough, they still have universities, that is being dismissive to the current condition in which they are still being oppressed and they are still being oppressed to this day, ladies and gentlemen. Why the Western education institution is the one that could cater their needs? Because they have capital to begin with. They have the best form of curriculum in terms of feasibility. They have the money to provide better curriculum. They have power and image to the society. Because if Harvard set up their campus in oppressive state, meaning that international society will validate their state because Harvard has a major name. Yale has a major name in international society. So our best case scenario that we're going to gain validation and create more development under that oppressive state. Secondly, the principle of education. The principle of education, one, is that equal opportunities, give platforms to those who are not lucky enough. For example, scholarship programs, bidik misi and so on and so forth. It is still in line with education because in progressive state, there are societies who are lack of education. it's still in our proposal is in line because we give platforms for people, platforms for society to educate them with the best form of curriculum, because we have the power to give them that kind of education that they need, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, if we set up campuses in oppressive states, we could give them the basic necessary tools of the education. We give them the opportunity to have more room to gain knowledge, to study and socializing to one another, because in oppressive states, people have equal starting points to begin with, because they have sense of belonging due to the struggle that they face together. So there will be no superiority complex, that they will feel comfortable to one another. Going to the second clash, which sides will have better development in oppressive state? All of their characterization why they're going to create development, all of their characterization why status quo enough, they are still being dismissive. They are still being dismissive towards the condition that they are still being oppressed to this day, ladies and gentlemen. If status quo is progressive enough, if universities are progressive and have better curriculums, then why they still face oppression? Then why they still cannot get out of the oppressive state? Why didn't they still have capital? Why there are still hierarchy between the oppressive state, ladies and gentlemen? Even if China has HGUS, have progressive societies, why they still under the dictators? Why they still under the authoritarian governance? So their characterization, but why status quo is enough, doesn't really necessarily explain why they're going to create organic and systematic change anyway. In our side of the house, our side is better because by default itself, we are the one that gives them the best form of education. We already said to you that we're going to have accountable outspring, because we're still going to we're going to still hold selections at the end of the day anyway. Like any other universities, we're still going to be selective, but we're still going to be inclusive at the same time. So if opposition said that the outcome of the education will not be that good, it's already being debunked by models, because we're still going to hold selection. We're going to still have requirements. We're going to still be selective. We give them because we give them accountable curriculum. If open more doors to the student through Western education institution, you're going to be seen as someone that's graduated from Harvard, from Yale. You will be validated in a large spectrum. People want to work with you. People want to invest with you. If oppressive states have accountable graduate students, meaning that they have affiliation with Harvard, most likely they will invest on that country because they will validate the human resource under that oppressive state. So their base case about organic change and systematic change will still insist in our side, because in our side is better. Our side is much better because we give them the best kind of platform. Secondly, lastly, is oppressive government already give consent? We already said to you that we're going to set up campuses in oppressive state that already gave the approval to set up campus. Why this kind of oppressive state exists? Even if they're oppressive, doesn't mean that they don't need human resource. They have international image to maintain. They don't want to be given sanctions by the international community for being oppressive. Even if they're oppressive, they don't want to be seen as a failed government. They want to gain profit. They want tangible outcome, because they might think that by setting up campuses like Harvard, they can benefit from this. They could develop the research. Since it's campus like Harvard, they have major name. They have personal interest. They might want to profit from. So clearly our side is better, because we already explained to you that we're going to have much more accountable curriculum in comparison to the status quo that they already set.
We agree that education is good. We agree that when you widen your window for more education is good. But the question is that what the oppressive states needed, or is that the thing that citizens need and necessary inside of status quo, gentlemen? Because this debate does not only talk whether the education is needed and whether the education is good, but also should talk about the feasibility, whether the oppressive states will, for example, utilize this Western education institution with a good way in which it will lead the society to have a more open life life and a more chance of having the voices, etc., etc., ladies and gentlemen. We think that government side of the house do not provide that analysis in today's debate, right? Their main argumentation is only about that they are not enough education and they need education, etc., etc., and by that it will have more open chances for these people to have the check and balances, etc. So without process of why this education and the Western education institution values can be able to, for example, coming up people to speak up, and why that kinds of education will make the government itself have a more softer heart to listen their society in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why we told you that what in opposition want is an organic change, and even if they cannot have an organic change, at least that these oppressive states will not be more oppressive, like how Haykal already told you in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So here's the clashes that we will have in today's debate, right? First on the educational system, and second on how that we will have the change in the end of the day. So in the educational system first, they told you that this state do not have enough and a good education system like the curriculum, etc., etc. First, ladies and gentlemen, we told you that this is not the problem of oppressive states only. Why it is exclusively to oppressive states, that like how they argue to you. Haykal and also Neny already asked you the question. But why the further question is that why it should be in the form of having the setting up of the Western educational institution colleges? Because we told you that why not having, like, for example, the educational tour or the research to other countries or the students exchange or the scientist exchange, and etc. the kind form of educational system that you could have, for example, to have a wider perspective inside of education, and etc., etc., ladies and gentlemen. You can only say that the education is successful when it meets you can only say that this education is successful when it meets the demand and the necessary thing that the society want in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Second of all, we told you the definition of a good educational system is like this. First, as long as it caters the need of having agricultural sector, for example, the practical and the theoretical skills in the job field. Or second, as long as the knowledge students get inside class can be applied in future job inside of that country. Or third, as long as state provide the needs of facilities and etc., etc., ladies and gentlemen. So we think that as long as these oppressive countries still provide those all, and we argue to you that they still provide this all, so it's still okay instead of status quo, ladies and gentlemen. We told you that education is success and their life expectancy is also good if the state also fulfill the demand and the necessity of what the society exactly want in the end of the day. But third, let's engage, maybe it's not the state like North Korea, but it's state like Vietnam and China. We told you that if about China and etc., we think that there are many people go to China to even learn their education, etc., etc., ladies and gentlemen. In each of the year, China also opened a scholarship for people to go there, ladies and gentlemen. Or the case of Vietnam, we think that the students in Vietnam also still engage in a democratic talk by other countries like Democracy Forum, for example. So we don't think that they are that oppressive in the terms that they do not open for educational system in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. But here's the comparative, right? If you open inside of their country, we think that if you would like it to be a benefit to all citizens, it will not happen, because if you open this like Yale, Harvard, etc., etc., the people who can only access it is people who are privileged or people who are powerful inside of that country, who are the children of this oppressive regime, ladies and gentlemen. And we don't think that this benefit for all the citizens inside of their country in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. You only open a more benefit and you only open for a more window for people who are already privileged and not people who are not privileged. So in the end of the day, your sense of educational system will not happen inside of your state. But second, they told you that divisibility is that oppressive country need it because they for too long focus on military, etc., etc. We think that that's not what happened in oppressive regime, right? Most likely like China, they focus also on economy. But even if it is true, we think that focusing in military doesn't mean they don't allocate budget to economy, because economy cycle should also run inside of their house in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, inside of their country. So the good intention of them providing the education and the necessary thing that they think necessary for their economy development and the people's sustainability and the people's survivability will still exist in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. But maybe lastly, right, if they need more education, we think that that's not in the form of westernization values and ideas coming upon their own culture, ladies and gentlemen. It's maybe upon the change that the society or the demand of society of how they would like to run the country and of how they would like the education be more expanded, etc. And not on the basis of the Western itself that inject the things inside of their country. And Haykal already told you why it is bad. But second clashes on how it will create changes. We told you that our stance in here is that we want an organic change. What does it mean? First, it comes internally from society to upper, lower ground people, that they realize that there are something wrong, and society will, and in the end, all society will have to fight together. But second, having yourself to realize that things are bad means you need step-by-step process and not fast like what government say to you, right? This comes from individual and the communal themselves. But how's the likelihood of this change will happen? First, we told you that international society scrutiny exists. They scrutinize Kim Jong-un, they scrutinize Xi Jinping also for the case of Uyghur. So the international society attention on this oppressive country already exists. But second, in status quo, the states and the international organization do sanction to states that are oppressive too, ladies and gentlemen. So we believe that there are already an exposure of how they should change and of how they should realize the change that they would like. But third of all, the grassroots movement in injecting that we should have the change is running too, ladies and gentlemen. So the likelihood of the status quo exists, right? But second, how inside of their side it will be bad, right? Why they cannot be able to create the change? Because it's not suitable, and does not mean that all people would like to enter to that, like how Neny's argumentation, right? But second, even if people will inherit the values and people accept the values, we think that it will only be in a certain marginal of people that will, for example, inherit that values. People who already exposed to Western values and people who are really want to go out from this oppressive regime, ladies and gentlemen. But why this is bad? Because it will not communal. It will just some part of the people. Why they cannot be? Why cannot they be so influenced to the communal and all society? Because they are the people who would like to have a fast change. Because for so long they have been oppressive and etc. ladies and gentlemen. So you can only change individually but not communally, which is the thing that is very needed for oppressive regime. Because the only way for you to fight for the government is by communal and by all society fighting upon them, ladies and gentlemen. So in your side of the house, the will not happen. But even if we cannot achieve the change like how government want it to be idealistic, we think that why it is okay. First, the goal should not be set that ideal, right? We don't want them to have like 180-degree change. Authoritarian does not always mean bad, we think, in status quo, right? But moreover, if you see this in Western people glasses, you will always see that it is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. That is why Neny's principle is talking about why you forcing them to change is also an oppressive approach to the state, ladies and gentlemen. And it is not justified in the end of the day, because you do not, for example, like making this society, internal society, having the argumentation of what they actually want, but just directly saying that being liberal and having democratic state is always good. But second, we prevent the oppressive state to be more oppressive, like how Haykal already told you. Here's the likelihood why the oppressive state will be more oppressive, because there will be people who like what they say, will create the change and will create riot and will coming up to the government. And government of oppressive regime does not like this, right? So of course they will be more oppressive towards these people and the people who will be influenced by this narrative, ladies and gentlemen, and that is bad. The value that they teach inside of the college, like free market, individual capitalization, things that oppressive regime does not like, and things that will, for example, sip over their power and they're a benevolent actor instead of status quo, and that's the thing that will make this oppressive regime more oppressive. Thank you.